It was always seen as the holy grail, the superior instrument. And as we're all aware, it took the SEC a very long time to feel comfortable with our Bitcoin spot ETFs.
You're listening to Because of Bitcoin, a podcast that shares the personal stories of how Bitcoin is having a real impact in people's lives, including mine. I'm your host, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, the co-founder and CSO of Ledin. And without further ado, let's get started with today's story. On January 10th, 2024, Bitcoin reached a monumental milestone. 15 years after Satoshi Nakamoto mined the first Bitcoin block, the US Securities and Exchange Commission granted approval for the first spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. This was the day that Bitcoin formally arrived on Wall Street. This new investment vehicle simplifies the process of investing in Bitcoin, and it makes it available to a tsunami of institutional capital for reasons that we'll get into in this episode. It also introduces a significant shift for the better in Bitcoin's market structure. It signals that Bitcoin is maturing and becoming a more integrated part of the global financial system. Leah Wald is a good friend, a Bitcoiner, and the founder of Valkyrie, one of the 9 issuers that made history by getting the first ever spot Bitcoin ETFs approved. Upon the approval of her spot Bitcoin ETF, the company was acquired by CoinShares. I had the pleasure of sitting down with her to discuss what it's been like to bring Bitcoin to Wall Street and to orange pill legacy finance titans. I'm sure you'll enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Hi, Leah. How are you?
Good, Mauricio. It's good to see you. Always good to see you. Doing well. What about you?
Likewise, doing great. Largely in part thanks to a bunch of developments that have been happening in the industry that you've played a big role in, and we'll discuss that in today's chat. I would love for you to give a little context, if possible, about your background. What was childhood like for Leah Wald? What were some of the things that interested you?
Sure. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. What comes to me right now, given I have a 2-year-old, and just thinking about my own childhood and, how she's growing up, I do remember spending most of my childhood trying to explore the woods and be outside. So it was kind of this interesting mix of being in the city and on the city border, but also spending every waking hour I could bothering my parents to take me hiking. So I guess when I think back on my childhood, it was very much a mix of being outside in nature and also trying to live the city as much as I could as a young adult.
That's great. I didn't know that about you. When you were growing up, was money or finance a part of the discussions at home? How did you think about finance or economics when you were growing up?
That's actually a really interesting one for me, and I guess I'm going to go deep with you. My mom came from a very poor family in Iowa. She was a corn farmer, very hardworking. Northern Iowa, small town that even Iowans have never heard of. So finances were spoken about differently, talked about differently, and the education around personal finance was either non-existent or learned on the fly based on what you were learning from your community or your family. And that was kind of it. Whereas my father came from a Chicago family of lawyers, well-educated, and a very different socioeconomic background. They came together at 21, got married after knowing each other for 2 weeks, and ran off together. So there's that. But they raised me and my brother very differently, and seeing finances under, I think, a light of understanding that people come from different backgrounds. I would say that I did not learn as much about personal finance as I wish I had growing up. But growing up, it does come from just seeing even my own family fairly divided from a socioeconomic perspective, but being close with both sides and trying to understand what that means.
That's fascinating. The reason I love asking that, in particular to people that grow up in places like North America, is that I've always been fascinated by the fact that people can grow up in a country with functioning money, with no real political issues as much as you would like to compare them to the rest of the world. Yet Bitcoin shows up typically through some personal experience, something that happened in your life, and you had some type of outside shock that just didn't follow the path, right? You have a very interesting thread and your interests very much aligned with international the world beyond North America. And that's not something I typically see. You've spent a lot of time abroad. You've educated yourself abroad. You've worked abroad. Where does that drive to see the world come from? Was there an experience or a particular moment where you said, I want to see the world?
So by the end of high school, I started applying to whatever international schools would take me, and ended up in Jerusalem at an international boarding school. I applied to anywhere under the sun that had some sort of boarding school with a scholarship. Prior to that, actually, I went to El Salvador in, I guess this would have been 2006. I was staying in a smaller village, and that was probably my most eye-opening experience. And I went with a few peers, very similar to a really wonderful nonprofit organization that just, for the most part, provided a lot of education, actually around financial literacy, as well as building materials. This was a very, poor village. And again, coming from the effects of the Arena Party at the time and a lot of very serious political upheaval during that time period. So right on the back of that, I came back to DC. I guess I got the bug that I didn't want to stay in an American high school there anymore and wanted to see the world immediately.
So how did you get to the World Bank Group out of school? How did that come about?
I was so lucky. I met Obiazek Wesley, who I still consider to be my greatest mentor, of my life. She was the former Minister of Education in Nigeria, but she also founded Transparency International. So if we talk about actually Bitcoiner roots, this is one of the most important first organization that tried to shine light on illicit finance and what was happening in different nations, especially in Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa. So thanks to meeting Obi, I was actually able to work in her office. So I worked for her executive assistant. That was a 4-month stint to start off with, and it was just completely eye-opening. So the prelude there to learn about Bitcoin, but also I guess to realize this is definitely, my passion is working in international development. I know that may seem different than Valkyrie, but definitely underpins it, was that at that time period, there was a project called M-Pesa that was being built within the World Bank and specifically within the sub-Saharan Africa region in Kenya. M-Pesa was actually the first microfinance SMS-based micro-lending system. Very successful. Back in 2009, I believe it launched. That's when I was at the World Bank Group. So I know it was around that time period. It was eventually bought by Vodafone because it was so successful. But quite literally, you'd be in the capital and you can text your family money with easy fiat off-ramps in the village. I mean, it just perfect. So when I learned about Bitcoin, again, didn't buy until much later, the common story that we say, right? But from a use case perspective, it was a no-brainer because I had just seen it. So whereas I didn't quite understand how the rails were going to work, something that Ledin saw, but, from just a digital currency that is permissionless value transfer, sure, it works. I know it works. So that's kind of where my eyes opened on Bitcoin. And then, there was the rabbit hole after that.
What was the path from the time you found out Bitcoin existed to the moment you knew you wanted to work on it professionally and dedicate your life to it? At what point did you say, I'm quitting my fiat life, I'm going into Bitcoin?
So I full-time, I guess it was 2017 with Tyler Jenks. So my former partner, business partner, was a brilliant, beautiful gentleman named Dean Tyler Jenks. He's the founder of hyperwave theory and many other technical analysis tools, a brilliant CIO who then was leading Lucid Investments. But I had known him for most of my life. The background story on that is that his son and my brother started their first company as freshmen in college. So I definitely had known Tyler. And, fast forward, we're having Thanksgiving dinner and Tyler laughs at me. He's actually managed my own PA, and he's telling me that I'm in Bitcoin investments. And I was like, Tyler, what are you talking about? And he's talking about, then he starts going off on GBTC and Bitcoin mining. And he says, oh yeah, I've had a good percentage of your portfolio in GBTC since it launched. I was like, what the heck is going on here? So after that Thanksgiving dinner, actually, I started working with Tyler full time.
Before we dive further into ETFs or exchange-traded funds, it's important we understand a little more about Tyler's work on hyperwave theory. This framework describes a market bubble made up of 7 different phases from initial growth to a series of rallies and corrections that all ends up in a climax phase. Tyler used hyperwave theory to identify these phases, which can help predict market trends on asset prices, including exchange-traded funds. ETFs come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They can hold bonds, gold, and equities from any mix of companies, including, as we will learn today, Bitcoin miners. Spot Bitcoin ETFs are designed to mirror the price of Bitcoin itself. And this is revolutionary for digital assets, for several reasons that Leah will eloquently explain.
It was always seen as the holy grail, the superior instrument. And as we're all aware, it took the SEC a very long time to feel comfortable with our Bitcoin spot ETFs. In Canada, I believe the approval was in January 2021 or February 2021. Sorry, don't quote me on those 2-month laps. So they've been trading for a long time. Before that, ETPs across Europe, Brazil, etc. So it really has taken the SEC quite a while. We have had the Bitcoin futures ETFs in the States since October 2021. What's different, again, is they are holding futures. So you can come across a tracking error. You have to deal with roll costs. And the vehicle itself is called a 1940 Act vehicle. And it has its own associated costs. So it's not a clean structure to hold Bitcoin. So now you have this very clean structure of holding spot underlying Bitcoin. Again, very similar, almost identical to the products in Canada. So that's incredible. Why is it also optimal? There was a fee war that raged strong even before these ETFs launched. So at this point, they are very affordable. I think that Bitwise kind of led that race, and then BlackRock and Invesco and Fidelity decided to chime in, and then the rest of us came in as well. But most of the issuers have fee waivers for months and very low fees. So at this point, I think that that's wonderful for investors. It's tough as an issuer. However, it's great for investors. So it's a very affordable way to securely have a packaged product for whatever account requires that type of product. As we all know, we can self-custody. You can get a hardware wallet. You can buy spot directly, but that's not always the case in some of the accounts that you want to be holding Bitcoin. That just doesn't exist quite. So as of right now, today's day and time, and I think foreseeably the next few years, it's a really great vehicle for those accounts, for those fiduciaries on the larger scale and allocators who are using their brokerage accounts and need something very familiar, same wrapper, same accounting. And it's a great way to hold it.
That's fascinating. And your answer highlights some things that I think are things that are very important, which one is you understand Bitcoin. And I believe you and the Valkyrie team understand Bitcoin in a way that an OG understands Bitcoin, in a way that an original cypherpunk would understand Bitcoin. I've heard you in other podcasts say that there's people in your company that were in the Satoshi mailing list. And so how does it feel to be the OGs, butting heads with these very, very Wall Street people and sort of break the path? Because you guys led that charge. You guys had filings and applications from very, very early on. So I guess the question is, what was that moment when you said, I can go up against these guys and I can have a product that competes against these guys? And what's that process been like of you educating regulators on why this thing should exist?
Firstly, I think it's really important to say that these are sophisticated products. Even though they're very simple in the background, it's very manual. You have to pick your custodian. You still need to determine where you're trading. You still have a lot of crypto nuances to these products. and counterparty risk. So I think that there's definitely an importance here, since we saw what happened in 2022 when new industry players had epic partnership risk and counterparty risk. And it destroyed not just their companies, but all the retail public and new individuals that were interested in Bitcoin. All of their savings got wiped out as well because they didn't know the industry and who to partner with, and maybe didn't, what we know very well, did not perform any due diligence in order to see if they were appropriate or not. So one thing that's definitely interesting about these ETFs is, again, you are working with crypto native players. You are picking a custodian, you are picking exchanges to trade with and trading partners, et cetera. So it is important, I believe, to make sure that you are, at least learning from folks in the industry, whether, again, they are cypherpunks and OGs or Ledin's team or anyone who's educating about any concerning partners and or gold standard partners. And then you should look into the ETF to see who, those counterparties actually are, because as much as I'd like for everybody to sleep at night and say that everybody is prime time after what happened in 2022 and kind of a great cleansing of companies in the States, for better or for worse, both, of crypto companies, there are still a lot of scary, not appropriate risk management practices out there. So we believe that we have completely created a foolproof, very tight, we're very confident in the system and ecosystem and plumbing that we've created, but these products are still using crypto native custodians and other players. So that is, I think, really important and something that has needed to be learned very quickly for the traditional financial players. They don't have the same legacy knowledge of who was at the helm when this firm first launched. And was that connected to an individual that performed perhaps inappropriate behaviors? And are they still connected from an equity perspective, right? So kind of these, where the body's buried actually matters. And I think that our competitors have had to learn that really quickly. And I think that they're trying, and I think that they've done the best that they can and are doing a great job on picking their partners. But it's definitely likely going to be a floodgates of new partners that are coming to the table with these fee wars. So we'll probably see some options out there and maybe movements. So I think that that's been interesting. What is it like to try to get a seat at the table? It's been fantastic. I feel like we're the crypto kids who are respected and do have that seat at the table. And that's just wonderful, because if we're at the table, then we can actually effectuate change. So through those different conversations with the staff, but also speaking with competitors and different individuals in different departments at various TradFi banks or just, across the spectrum, we can start educating on the ecosystem and what's necessary and pushing that narrative of understanding the network. Obviously a lot of people are interested in the fact that you can speculate and invest in Bitcoin, but don't understand that there's a big B and a little b for Bitcoin, and that understanding the network and the community of the network matters just as much to actually understand your investment and how do Bitcoin miners work. And if you want to think about the picks and shovels, it matters a lot. So we try to educate, and it doesn't matter if it's a competitor or not. Everybody needs to understand this if we want Bitcoin to stay alive. And something very well is it's code, and the Bitcoin developers are working on that code every day. And I hope that they stay. And if we screw up as participants in the ecosystem and make it uninteresting for people to stay, then, we can't take it for granted. It's unlike anything else. So.
And I think your answer highlights a great point, which I like to stress every chance I get. There's a lot of things that money can't buy. Experience and color and having been a part of this industry is one of them. 2022 showed us that you can raise all of the billions and have the smartest people in the room, and you can still create massive fraud or have no idea what you're doing. Some things just take time. And I think that a lot of the people that have invested that time to learn and educate others throughout this journey are going to reap the rewards, because at the starting off the gate, if you show up with a massive pile of money and some pretty logos, everybody looks great at the start. But again, over time, you start seeing who can really withstand. And I have, no doubt that you guys' team is in it for the right reasons. I would love for you to give us a quick recap of the products that you have in the market, and also how do you come up with the best stock tickers in the game?
For products, we have cryptocurrency trusts. These are private placements similar to a GBTC pre-up listing. And then we have a hedge fund that's thematic. That's called the opportunistic hedge fund. And then we have the ETFs. We have a Bitcoin miners ETF, and we have a Bitcoin and Ether futures ETF. And then of course the Bitcoin spot. Yes, we pride ourselves on tickers big time. For even the Bitcoin futures ETF, we tried to get BTFD in there. The SEC wasn't happy and we were not allowed. But BTFD, of course, WAGMI for, Bitcoin miners. We've played around with NGU and other different ones. We have a couple other tickers reserved, so expect some fun in the future. And then Burr, we've been sitting on for 3 years preparing for spot. As soon as we filed, we snagged it, we reserved it, and we have just been waiting to release that ticker. We were just very excited about that one for the spot ETF.
Valkyrie's ETF tickers are a nod to the Bitcoin community, and they really nail the Bitcoiner on Wall Street brand. You can tell that the products were built by one of us. BRRR, or BRRR, is a play on the sound that the Federal Reserve's money printer makes every time they dilute the value of everyone's savings, and they pump Bitcoin's price in the process. And BTFD is a popular acronym in the community, which typically stands for Buy the Freaking Dip. I'm a big fan of the Valkyrie team and everything they do. As we get to now towards the end of the show, I wanted to ask you, what do you think comes next after the ETFs? What types of opportunities does this open up?
I actually think it's product like yours. I think it's creator access for individuals from a lending perspective. I'm a big fan, as you know, of different payment platforms and P2P marketplaces, especially in developing countries like LATAM, and how that can facilitate just a more stabilized financial opportunities, whether it's DCAing into stables or Bitcoin. I think that the future is utilizing Bitcoin in its uses, whether it's collateralization, whether it's, any of the myriad ways that we utilize other assets in traditional finance. So I'm watching let-in, actually. I think that the ETFs are really fantastic. I think there's going to continue to be growing demand and use. Right now, some of the platforms have disallowed the ETFs to be on those platforms. That's Vanguard and others. And that won't be forever. So that, it will be interesting to watch how things play out there. I think there's a lot of pessimism in the market right now that there aren't more inflows into the ETF since they were launched. And I think that it's very short-sighted right now. I think the question is what were the inflows at the end of the year and also the next 2 years? If you look at gold, we all need to be a little patient here, but that's just definitely one product, but it's a great product. So I think that can last for many years, but that's just for individuals, advisors, sovereigns, and other allocators that need that wrapper. From the retail perspective, again, I think they need let-in. I think they need other products that are more individualized to their needs on a daily basis to really just, I'm stopping loquacious. There's just so many needs out there. There's so many desires. There's so much that can be done. Going back to passionate roots, it still hasn't been solved on the microeconomic development level, but there finally are great companies out there. Again, Lennon included, Eldorado, of course, and many others that are finally solving that with good tech and getting into the ground. I think what's been really missing is just community builders. I think that there's a lack of understanding for the importance of a community manager and a community builder, and people actually just going on the ground, the boots on the ground of different countries and explaining how this can help. That is a skill I do not have, but I have seen in others and think it is the most powerful skill I've ever seen. Those are those grassroots organizers. And by getting more of those folks out there, and they are in countries that need to use Bitcoin and other rails for other stables, perhaps, that's when we're going to see the adoption. And that's the products I think we need.
That's a great answer and very aligned with the way I see it. I think the ETFs just normalize activities that for some might be unfamiliar. So borrowing against your Bitcoin, earning interest on your Bitcoin. Some people might have not been comfortable doing that outside an ETF wrapper. Now they will be. Now they will talk about it. Now people will see a Bitcoin logo next to a BlackRock logo, or next to a logo that they've seen in the media, or next to a New York Stock Exchange logo, or with a ticker. And so this all legitimizes everything in your view and makes you feel a lot more comfortable about this whole thing. And to the point about community, how does one become a part of the Valkyrie community? Do you have anything that people can register for in terms of a newsletter, or like where can our guests find more about your work and your firms?
Oh, thanks, Mauricio. And I agree with what you're saying. Yes, I think you can go straight to our website, valkyrieinvest.com. My Twitter DMs are always open. So is email, and any other way you want to get in touch. Reach out anytime. Again, always available and interested in talking.
Bitcoin's journey to Wall Street has been a long time coming, and spot Bitcoin ETFs are only the beginning. Bitcoin is growing up. Now, some of the biggest names in traditional finance, including BlackRock and Fidelity, have a vested interest in their products and Bitcoin doing well. Bitcoin's price discovery, trading volumes, and liquidity are now moving to fully regulated venues and vehicles. This shifts Bitcoin's center of gravity more towards Wall Street. Stronger, bigger, and more stable counterparties will be a solid foundation to build the next generation of financial services for Bitcoin, which is exactly what we're doing here at Ledden. In fact, several spot Bitcoin ETF market makers and authorized participants borrow Bitcoin from us at an institutional level. I believe we're about to see Bitcoin's evolution accelerate. And this evolution would not have been possible without the hard work and dedication of people like Leah and others. And they're not stopping here. Leah, myself, and thousands of other Bitcoiners wake up every day to build the future we all want to see. And we'll make it happen because of Bitcoin. If you enjoyed this Because of Bitcoin episode, I would be very grateful for the 5 seconds it would take you to drop us a review and give us a rating on your favorite podcasting platform. This will really help us reach even more listeners. And if you'd like to learn more about Bitcoin, be sure to check out our newsletter by subscribing at ledn.io. That's ledn.io. Again, this was Mauricio Di Bartolomeo. Stay tuned for our next episode. And until then, muchas gracias y los quiero mucho. Chao, chao.